Producers, listen up. Are you looking for a unique way to flip samples so you don't sound like every other producer out there? Well, today I'm gonna be reacting to a content creator named Navie D. He's gonna go ahead and give us some tips on flipping samples, similar to how the Neptunes used to do way back in the day. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a listen and also add my feedback onto it so that way you're getting double the value. So let's go ahead and take a listen to it and see what kind of new techniques we can pick up. You ready? Let's get into it.
Now to start, this sampling technique is probably different than what you're used to. When most producers think of sampling, they picture using full songs off of vinyl or YouTube, chopping them up and using them to make a full beat. But that's just one way of sampling. Another is to take a simple sound, whether it be from a record or even a stock keyboard, and sampling this to make an entire beat idea. But what you might be thinking is, how is this even sampling? Isn't this the exact same as just using a plugin or making a beat with a modern day VST? Well, here's the difference. If we go into a typical VST that modern beatmakers use, including myself, and we play a single note here, nothing unusual so far. Next, if we play this at multiple different keys, we get what sounds like a normal instrument playing multiple keys. But what if we did something unusual here? What if we take a single note of this exact sound and record it like this? And then we use this to play the exact same pattern. Let's take a listen to what happens. Again, this is the regular pattern coming from a VST. And here is the pattern using the single sampled note. It sounds different than how the regular VST sounds, almost like a less realistic version of the same sound.
You know, this actually kind of reminds me of something we used to do with the MPC back in the day. So I've owned the MPC 2500 and I've also owned the MPC 1000. And with both of those drum machines, you can actually take a single note and spread them across the pads. So you could just hit the pads and then hit another pad, and then it would change keys and it would change the note, excuse me. And then you can get some unique sounds, get some unique textures, because you would get these artifacts that come with it where it's not totally pretty, it's not totally neat. You knew things didn't quite go together, but if you kind of locked in, kept your head down, and kept grooving on the MPC, you never know what kind of sound you could come up with that maybe other producers wouldn't have explored. You know, it's musically incorrect, but it's correct because it felt good, if that makes any sense. Also, on that point, it kind of reminds me of just working in the analog realm, making beats on the MPC. Things just sounded like they naturally just glued together. I didn't really need to work on getting things kind of blended together or glued together like we do these days with our different plugins. Things just were already sounding good. So I'm wondering if we use this technique and we get like older school sounds, we're sampling vinyl, we're doing single notes, maybe sampling snares and things like that. Maybe we can mix a little bit of the old school and blend it with the new school and see what kind of unique type of fusion we can get. We don't want to be so throwback where we're just trying to recreate the past, but we don't want to be so futuristic that we forget the keys, the foundations, the thing that made music great and addictive. So I'm digging this video so far, and I'm curious to see what else he explores that we can implement into our workflow.
Many modern VSTs are built by recording someone literally playing every single note, so you can replicate what sounds like a real instrument played by an actual person. But if we just sample one of these notes and use that as our instrument and play it at multiple different notes, it can create an entirely different and unique sound or feel to the beat. This is the core of the note flip technique that the Neptunes mastered. If we take this one single guitar sample, I can recreate the exact pattern from Super Thug with the exact matching tone. And so this is the first step of doing this technique. Sample a single note. Now, whether you want to do this by going into a VST and sampling this yourself, or you want to find a single note from a vinyl record, or you just want to use a stock one-shot, it's up to you. But the key is to use a sample of a single note.
Really, for this technique, I would more so personally lean towards just sampling vinyl or cassettes or just something old school, because whenever you sample the VSTs, me personally, it still feels and sounds very, very clean and very, very perfect. And for this technique, if we're really trying to emulate the nostalgic feel, let's really go all the way there in this instance. Let's go ahead and grab a little piece of music and then actually stretch it out across the keyboard. You know, we have different older school musicians, people like Herbie Hancock, who would use these different synths. And those different synths, you know, maybe we may not use it in the same kind of way in the modern era. Maybe we may not play the chords in the same kind of way. You know, let's go back to those legends. Let's get little pieces of music here and there. Just grab those little notes and see what kind of feel, what kind of energy we can get from those people who made that classic sound. So let's go all the way there if we're going to try this technique. That's just my 2 cents to add to this specific technique. Let's go all the way and, you know, see what kind of results we get.
For my beat, I'm going to grab this guitar one shot here. Bonus tip, try doing some subtle manipulation to the sound to get it to sound even more different than the typical sound coming from VST. For this sound, if I ignore the beginning part of this guitar and isolate just this end part here, I can use this as the single note for my beat. But now comes the part of building the actual pattern using the sound. And this is where we move on to step 2. If we jump back into the beats by the Neptunes, you'll notice a common theme with the patterns that they build when using this sampling technique. For example, if we look at the pattern for What Happened to That Boy again, or if we jump over to Knock Yourself Out, you notice that these patterns are not very musical. The range that these notes play in are often within just 1 octave. And this is the theme in many of the Neptunes beats.
Now, speaking of that, I want to add another point onto this. Now, one other thing that made the Neptunes music so legendary, so addictive, was those bridges, those legendary bridges that Chad and Pharrell would put together in their music. They would have the verse, they would have the hook, having these unique sounds, kind of spacey sounds that almost sounded incorrect, but it felt so good and it was so addictive. And then the bridge would just give us so much relief. It would just sound so pretty and smooth. Not in every beat, but in certain songs, especially their hip hop and R&B fusion songs, those bridges were so addictive and so memorable. As a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of their work with the singer Khalees, so go back in the archive and listen to the productions with Khalees. They would have the same bold, brave kind of musical sound, edgy sound. But then once we got to those bridges with the hip hop and R&B songs, man, it felt so good. Like frontin', the bridge and frontin' sounds really good. But getting back to the edgier sound, listen to the song called Young, Fresh, and New by Khalees that the Neptunes produced. It has a real edgy rock and roll sound, but once we got to the hook, once we got to the bridge, it just gave us so much relief. So that's another thing is that contrast that Chad and Pharrell were able to do. Man, that just made it the type of music that we grew to know and love.
Playing the sample across a wide range of notes to create a musical pattern. So why is this? Well, the further away you play your note from the original pitch it was recorded in, the more bizarre this will sound. Now, while this might help you create some cool textures for sound design, it's not going to sound the greatest if you try to use this one sound to create a highly musical pattern for your beat. So that is why step 2 is to build a musically simple pattern. For my beat, I'm only going to use a few notes that all sit in a narrow range on the keyboard. And now we move on to the final step. This is the key detail that you should think about when you use this technique. At this point, your beat probably won't sound all that full. Again, since we're limited with just a handful of keys to make our loop, we probably won't be able to make anything that sounds like a complete and full idea. And this is why you'll notice with many of the Neptunes beats, they're full of unique rhythms and unusual sounds that play along with this single note sample. With our beat, so far we only have this one simple pattern. So let's grab an unusual sound. And I'm going to use this to bring a unique rhythm into my beat, helping my beat sound much more full and much more unique. Even if I use a more straightforward sound like a hi-hat, I can still use this as an opportunity to do something just a little bit different. And instead of creating a straightforward pattern like this, I'll do something like this. And now with a few more layers and some drums, we have ourselves a beat. And this is the final step that will help you turn this into a complete beat.
Now, one thing to keep in mind is in a lot of those classic Neptune songs, they were using the chord Trinity and the chord Triton for a lot of their drums. I used to own the chord Trinity, so I still remember some of those sounds that were in there. So those drums really sounded somewhat modern. I'm wondering what it would sound like if we took that guitar, took that sample, and then added those classic chord Triton sounds, like those sounds that you hear on the grinding beat. Those are straight stock sounds that came in those keyboards. A lot of you guys may not have known that, but those were stock sounds. And that really goes to show that just because you're using something that a lot of people have access to doesn't mean that you necessarily have to use it in the same way. So just tying that all in together, I'm wondering if we took away those modern sounds, added those chord Triton sounds, could we take it all the way there musically and really get into the vein of that classic Neptunes feel? So I'm really liking the guitar. I like the vocal sample, but if we took those chord Triton sounds, I think we would really slam dunk it and take us all the way into a nostalgic zone.
This is the final step that will help you turn this into a complete beat, to fill up space with unique rhythms and textures.
So that was a great video. It really goes to show that playing it safe is not always the best thing. You know, the Neptunes, some of the issues that they had coming up was due to the fact that they were so unique and so off the beaten path. It was a bit of a struggle for artists to get onto their music. They were kind of made fun of, saying they have crazy space music because it really didn't fit the vein of what was going on at the time. So all the producers out there, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to break the mold and try something unique and off kilter in a way that is not familiar with everyone, but once you lock in with the right artist, they can help grow you. Another example is someone like Jetson made another one who produced a lot of the hits for DaBaby. He was also another producer who a lot of artists didn't really know what to do with his beats because they were so different. But once he locked in with DaBaby, of course, that just blew up and totally took over. So all those producers out there who people don't quite get you, man, find an artist, y'all two grow together, invest in yourself, invest in each other. And especially if you're serious, a lot of people who like to talk, but for the ones who are serious, y'all two grow together and just build that brand as that dynamic duo or that dynamic team who's not afraid to challenge the status quo and really create your unique thumbprint and brand that's going to make you super in demand because you're difficult to replicate. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit like and subscribe. My name is Desmond A, and I'll be back with more great videos. Peace.
Desmond A.